Despite being living someone else's life, Valerie Bertinelli smiled on television for 9 years in a row. Behind closed doors, however, she was collapsing. She married a man who was high on cocaine during their wedding and had a history of cheating when she was 20. She filmed her shows while taking caffeine pills. She was labeled worthless by her second spouse. Finally, at 64, she broke. She ceased drinking and weighing herself, and she wrote a book that exposed all of the lies. It was never the girl next door you expected. In Wilmington, Delaware, Valerie Bertinelli was born on April 23, 1960. But disaster had already befallen her family before she had even breathed. 2 years prior to Valerie's birth, at the age of 17 months, her older brother, Mark, had perished. Neither Nancy nor Andrew, her parents, ever entirely recovered. Growing up, Valerie was influenced by a youngster she had never met. Safety became her mother's obsession. In addition to being observed, Valerie was shielded like glass. Her mother's hands are never off her, not even in old family pictures. Valerie endured this strain every day, even though she had no idea why she felt the need to be flawless. Later on, she discovered that psychologists refer to it as being a replacement child, and it had a profound impact on her life that was hidden from view. The family didn't remain in one location for very long. Between Valerie's birth and the age of 15, they relocated 8 times, spanning 4 states. Every promotion meant moving to a new city for her father, who worked for General Motors. First Oklahoma City, then Pontiac, Wilmington, California, Michigan, and lastly Los Angeles. Never did Valerie attend a single school for longer than a year and a half. She discovered how to quickly blend in, make friends, and adapt to any crowd she found herself in. She later referred to her tendency to adapt to others as her chameleon complex. As an actress, what began as a survival strategy turned into her greatest asset. Having spent her entire life playing parts, she became them rather than merely playing them. All of that changed on July 26, 1972. The age of Valerie was 12. The little talent show that day cost $50, which her dad felt was a waste, so her mom nearly skipped it. But they went nevertheless. Valerie, wearing a $12 Woolworth's dress, sang "I Don't Know How to Love Him." Out of 347 children, she performed 47th. Her presence and speech seemed different for some reason. Casting director Ruth Birch, who was among the throng, noticed it right away. According to her, Valerie possessed the soul of an elderly person. Birch was the one who signed Valerie after 3 scouts approached her mother that evening. Over $40 million was earned during the $50 event. Perhaps the greatest investment in show business history. The part that would make Valerie famous came just 3 years later. She lied, though, to acquire it. Her audition for One Day at a Time took place on March 15, 1975. She claimed to be 16 but was actually just 15. Her birth certificate was even a fraud. For what reason? Due to labor rules in California, 16-year-olds are permitted to work longer hours without a full-time tutor. She was aware that being dishonest was the only way to get the same treatment as the older girls. It lasted 73 days. Then one of the production assistants noticed a discrepancy in her academic records. With a sob, Valerie revealed the truth. The show's creator, Norman Lear, did not fire her. He felt impressed. He described her as ready, brave, and intelligent. However, they had to pay nearly $127,000 in union and court charges for the falsehood. Valerie's future salaries were the source of the money. Valerie was more than just a talent to Lear. Something he recognized was there. In her last screen test on March 22, he urged her to act as though her character's parents were divorcing. Her eyes began to well up with tears. Her own parents were secretly contemplating a divorce at the time, but no one knew this. Lear recognized from his own childhood that she had a damaged heart. Later, he stated that she had the same eerie appearance that he had seen in the mirror when he was a child. They developed an odd bond at that moment. Lear became too defensive. A few cast members thought she was receiving preferential treatment. However, it wasn't partiality. It was recognition. He recognized himself in her. Valerie was only 15 years old when the show debuted in December of 1975. She rose to prominence as one of the youngest television lead actresses. While other children were working summer jobs for $2.10 an hour, Valerie was making thousands of dollars every episode. Most teenagers saved money for their prom attire. Fans were writing to Valerie from all over the nation. But independence was not freedom. The object was a cage. From 1975 to 1984, she changed her name to Barbara Cooper. And Barbara Cooper was always happy, resilient, and flawless. That was a role Valerie had to perform both on and off screen. The more successful the show became, the more she felt stuck with the role that everyone else adored. It was a huge show behind the scenes. Divorce, financial difficulties, loneliness, and other issues that affected Valerie deeply were covered. In real life, she was going through those difficulties. Despite her family's quiet disintegration, she had to maintain a grin on film. With each episode, she was forced into emotional areas she didn't fully comprehend. But because she had no other option, she gave birth. Bonnie Franklin, her co-star, became a sort of second mother to her. It wasn't always simple, though. Like a hawk, Franklin kept an eye on Valerie, including her boyfriends, her weight, and her attire. Unlike other teenagers, Valerie was unable to rebel. She couldn't afford to make a public error. She eventually confided in Franklin that she felt like she was losing it, and Franklin sent her to a therapist. Yes, it was compassionate, but it was also icy. Valerie's breakdowns were treated as though they were production set issues. Fixable, controllable, but never genuinely intimate. Her education also suffered a setback. Child actors were only required to attend school for 3 hours every day under California law. The minimum was given to Valerie. She missed graduation, prom, and every other event that a teen needs to feel normal. Valerie was memorizing scripts and posing for cameras while her pals were talking among themselves in the halls and learning how to drive. She was not an adolescent for 9 years. A TV character's life was hers. After the show ended, she had to relearn how to be authentic. She had become wealthy by her late teens, but she still felt insecure. Barbara Cooper felt content. Bertinelli Valerie wasn't. The fact that the world liked the person she was posing as was brought home to her with each payday. And the longer it went on, the more she drifted away from her true self. And then there was her tale of love. It all began in August of 1980. Valerie Bertinelli, who was only 20, was already well known for her program One Day at a Time. The 25-year-old guitarist Eddie Van Halen was blazing rock stages all across the nation. They first crossed paths backstage at a Van Halen show in Shreveport, Louisiana. Eddie was in the middle of speaking to someone else when he suddenly stopped when he saw Valerie. Then he abruptly stopped talking and approached her directly. For several months, he had kept a magazine clipping of her in his wallet. He was constantly informing his bandmates that he was going to wed that girl. He had even attempted to sneak backstage at her TV tapings in the past, it turns out. Security, however, turned him away. When they finally met, Eddie was so anxious and high on cocaine that he was hardly able to talk. His hands trembled. He continued massaging his nose. Nevertheless, he was able to ask her out. Love at first sight wasn't the only thing. It was the realization of obsession at last. Their initial date was unusual. At 2 p.m., they met at a coffee shop in West Hollywood, and they stayed until 10 p.m. For 8 hours. Eddie spoke much of the time. He drank many cups of coffee, chain-smoked, and opened up about everything. He informed her that for more than a year, he had been enjoying her photos in TV Guide. He gave extensive ideas about their future, including their home and the number of children they would have. In order to relax before meeting her, he even acknowledged doing cocaine. Valerie was torn between being flattered, laughing, and running. Nobody had ever been that interested in her. The guitar arrived next. A song he had written about her before they had ever met was performed by Eddie, who had brought a small acoustic. He sung about her smile and how she gave him a sense of vitality. It was too much to handle. Eddie proposed in April 1981, only 8 months later. A bespoke diamond ring in the shape of a guitar pick cost him $25,000. But chaos lurked beneath the gesture. It was his third day without sleep. He was paranoid and intoxicated. He got down on one knee after forcing Valerie to check all the windows and doors. It took more than an hour to complete. In an attempt to dismantle them, Eddie kept straying into bizarre tirades about the music business and malevolent forces. The worst part was that he was unable to select a single ring. After purchasing 3, he instructed her to select the one that resonated with her deeply. The moment was not romantic. That was unsettling. On April 11, 1981, at a large Westwood church, they were married. There are 400 guests and stars everywhere. It cost more than $100,000, or around $350,000 in today's currency. The fairy story quickly fell apart, though. Eddie was too inebriated to recall his vows. They were on a crumpled piece of paper that he had to read. She almost left during the wedding, Valerie later acknowledged. Then, during their first dance, Eddie said something in a whisper that broke her heart. After telling her that he had just used cocaine in the church restroom, he proceeded down the aisle. Then he inquired whether she would also want some. She's smiling in their wedding photos. However, it wasn't happiness. Shock was the feeling. The honeymoon lasted only 4 days. Hawaii was reached by plane. Sunsets and walks on the beach had been Valerie's dreams. Eddie, on the other hand, was usually locked in the bathroom or unconscious. In his guitar case, he had smuggled cocaine valued at almost $3,000. He was unconscious and had a bleeding nose when Valerie discovered him on day 3. The hotel security had to be called. Upon waking up, he accused her of having an affair with hotel employees. There were conspiracies, he yelled. He acted aggressively and with paranoia. She discovered then that, long before they had ever met, he had been using cocaine daily for more than 2 years. The man she fell in love with was not genuine. The drug-shaped version of him was this. The ensuing 2 decades were turbulent. Eddie continued to get addicted. He smoked, drank, and used drugs all the time. Valerie attempted to assist. She made an effort to comprehend, but it was unsuccessful. She was disintegrating behind closed doors. I never hated him, she once remarked, but I hated the drugs and the alcohol. His grief was visible to me. She married him at the age of 21. The emotional strain of loving an addict was more than she could handle. Eddie was also unfaithful. Things began to go wrong in the marriage. Since Eddie's death, Valerie has acknowledged that she mentally rewrote their past. Gave the impression that it was more romantic than it was. The truth, however, kept surfacing. There was turmoil, she claimed, and no true love, caring, or support. When Eddie was in the height of his addiction, they lost a pregnancy. Their suffering was exacerbated by their anguish. In 1991, their son Wolfgang was born. Their relationship, however, was already severely damaged by that point. Valerie fought by herself. Her career struck a snag in 1984 after the conclusion of One Day at a Time. In addition to having 2 sitcoms, Sydney and Café American, that were swiftly cancelled, she acted in modest TV films. She accepted whatever parts were offered to her for years. The situation worsened after she and Eddie split up in 2001. She did not seek child support or alimony. All they decided to do was split Wolfgang's expenses. However, her funds were rapidly depleting. There weren't many employment when she was in her 40s. At that point, she started speaking for Jenny Craig. Losing weight was not the only goal. It was about surviving. Valerie was dealing with more than simply money issues behind closed doors. She had lost her sense of value. I always thought that if I gained weight, I was unlovable, she once commented. There were severe wounds from sharing a home with someone who was intoxicated and missing all the time. Seldom did she think well of herself. She was worn out on the inside, yet she continued smiling for the cameras. When Eddie passed away in 2020, Valerie had to confront the reality. Behind the public persona, she acknowledged, they led a fairly tranquil life. America's sweetheart and the wild rocker were portrayed by the media as complete opposites. However, they were not what they appeared to be. The pain was evident despite their best efforts to conceal it. According to Valerie's later admission, she held on to the hope of their marriage for too long. It took years to realize that it had been poisonous from the beginning. Valerie Bertinelli entered the Hot in Cleveland audition room at the age of 50. Touched by an Angel ended in 2003, and she hadn't appeared on a TV show since. It was now 7 long years later. The spotlight had dimmed, the opportunities had dried up, and now she was being asked to star in a new comedy series with Betty White, no less. At the age of 88, Betty was a living legend with more than 60 years of experience. Valerie was afraid. For evenings before the filming, she stayed up worrying that she had lost her edge, her spark, and her timing. She never stopped practicing. Sometimes she would record her lines repeatedly in an attempt to get one laugh right. Her stomach turned at the prospect of making a mistake in front of Betty White. On June 16, 2010, the show made its debut. Cleveland's Hot didn't just survive, it took off. Every episode attracted 2.5 million viewers. Such figures have never been seen in TV land. The unexpected return of Valerie did not calm her anxiety. Only the stakes were raised. Although Valerie was viewed as the mentor, Betty was the eldest cast member. Producers looked to her as the seasoned pro to set the tone. The core cast was completed by Jane Leeves and Wendy Malick, but Valerie's resume was the longest. That ought to have given her confidence. It crushed her instead. She tried to control the panic episodes that came in waves by hiding in her trailer and writing in her journal in between scenes. With scripts in hand, lines committed to memory, and everything practiced, she arrived 2 hours early for each table read. Not even a moment of being taken off guard was something she wanted to avoid. The second season of the show was renewed just 2 months after its debut. It ought to have been excellent news. Valerie, however, only experienced pressure. More opportunities to fail, more episodes, and more people watching her. 23 episodes made up the first season. That was only the start. Something unexpected occurred at that time. The man she met was named Tom Vitale. The year was late in 2010. After a grueling 14-hour day of filming, Valerie had just concluded. She went to Wolfie Cohen's Rascal House in Aventura, Florida, just to relax and dine by herself. Tom approached her to say hi after noticing that she was sitting alone. Hollywood wasn't his home. He was 44, a finance professional, and 6 years Valerie's junior. He had never been wed. He only cared about her, not about fame. After 5 days, they went on their first date. They were inseparable after 3 weeks. Tom was everything that her past was not. Stability, peace, and lack of drama. Tom was a welcome change of pace following a lifetime of turbulent relationships and a 2007 divorce from Eddie Van Halen. By Christmas, they had already been discussing marriage. Why would you destroy someone you once loved and who once loved you? That therefore disproves the love you two formerly shared. In Malibu, Valerie and Tom were married on January 1, 2011. Just 100 people. Quiet, compact, and uncomplicated. Quite different from her first wedding, which was attended by 300 celebrities. This time, she wore a dress that she had purchased off the rack for $800. A press without a designer. They even brought their son Wolfgang and Eddie Van Halen. Although Valerie subsequently acknowledged that the ceremony felt hurried, everyone smiled. She had about 6 weeks to plan it. She didn't want to think about it too much. All she wanted was something familiar. She wanted to feel comfortable. She wanted to show that this time she could do it correctly. However, life did not slow down. It got harder, if anything. Hot in Cleveland's second season was well underway, and the schedule was harsh. Most days began before dawn. Valerie needed to arrive on the site by 5:30 a.m. Her departure time was 10 p.m. Each season had 20 to 23 episodes, which was far more than she was accustomed to. Coffee was no longer enough to give her the energy she needed. She started taking caffeine tablets at that point. From 400 to 600 milligrams daily. It's equivalent to 6 strong cups of coffee. Next were Red Bull and Monster energy drinks. 4 cans in one day is not uncommon. Adderall comes next. It was initially recommended as a focus aid. However, it quickly became her crutch. She needed it to stay witty, to get through scenes, and to stay sharp. Nobody knew. She kept everything a secret. She instructed her assistant to keep her trailer stocked. She carefully planned when to take the medications and when to consume the energy drinks so that she would be at her best for the movie. It succeeded. Her timing was perfect. Her quips were a hit. But the truth was known to her. She was attempting not to break while performing under pressure and using chemicals. Before everything started to change on August 8, 2015, Valerie Bertinelli was primarily recognized as a popular comedy star. A startling new chapter in Valerie's life began at that time with the debut of her show, Home Cooking. It was more than a one-season test. After becoming popular, the show ran for 14 seasons, totaling 157 episodes. The following year, she and Duff Goldman began co-hosting the Kids Baking Championship. Wasn't only an actress all of a sudden. She was a regular on the Food Network. That also came with a huge salary, up to $750,000 annually, just for hosting. Viewers felt as though they were in Valerie's kitchen because to her cozy, intimate approach of cooking at home. She prepared meals for her loved ones. She opened up, grinned, and laughed. It worked because it seemed genuine. She was even awarded 2 daytime Emmys for the show. However, by 2022, things had begun to shift. Priorities changed once Warner Media and Food Network merged. There were cookery demonstrations for education. There were competition shows with high stakes. It was a shift Valerie disliked. She expressed her longing for the time when the network taught cooking skills in an online post. She claimed that learning no longer seemed to be the main goal. Valerie stopped cooking at home by 2023. The program that had given her new life ended abruptly. In the background, Valerie's private life was disintegrating. Since their 2011 marriage, her union with Tom Vitale has become poisonous. He was emotionally abusive and exhibited narcissistic qualities, she subsequently claimed. Her divorce was filed in May 2022. Tom retaliated by attempting to nullify their prenuptial agreement and requesting $50,000 per month in support. She was still filming Kids Baking Championship at the moment. The pinnacle year of torment, as she dubbed it. She persisted despite the 8 agonizing months. She arrived for work grinning on camera but sobbing silently off camera. Finally, the divorce was finalized in November 2022. Valerie gave Tom $2.2 million in addition to an additional $500,000 earlier in the year. She declared it to be the second best day of her life on social media once it was over. Her remarks were truthful and unfiltered. She emerged stronger after having been crushed. During that time, she claimed to have discovered more about her own resilience, forbearance, and value than she had ever known. Valerie was fighting a struggle without making a sound, despite earning millions of dollars. Since childhood, her connection with food had been distorted. Once, a 5th-grade teacher prodded her abdomen and advised her to monitor that. It stayed with her. When she later joined Jenny Craig as a spokesperson, she acknowledged that she worked out twice a day and starved herself. She had reached her 60s. She stopped weighing herself and started to completely reject diet culture. She wrote, "This is a 150-pound body on a 5'4" frame," in 2023. "I have stopped weighing myself." What the chart showed didn't matter to her. She desired tranquility. She mirrored this new way of thinking in her 2024 cookbook Indulgence. The goal was to love food rather than to be afraid of it. Things didn't work out for her at Food Network. A new contract was signed by her in December 2021. She was removed from the Kids Baking Championship in January 2024, however, a year later. Her team's request for funds was deemed excessive by some. Others asserted that she was never offered anything by the network. In either case, it pained that she was gone. During her divorce, she said that the show had saved her life. It was like a lifeline being cut off. The food chain was altered. Valerie missed the days when cooking-related television programs like Ina Garten and Rachel Ray were popular. However, fast-paced competitions, drama, and excitement were what the new bosses desired. Then the unanticipated grief struck. Her son Wolfgang's father, Eddie Van Halen, passed away on October 6, 2020. He was just 65. In the hospital, Eddie's brother and second wife, as well as Wolfgang and Valerie, had been by his side every day. Wolfgang called her that morning to let her know that his breathing had changed. She hurried to the medical facility. In his final words, Eddie said, "I love you," to Valerie and Wolfgang alike. Then he disappeared. She could not convey how deeply the loss affected her. Online users even attacked her, saying she was mourning too much for her ex. However, she acknowledged that she had romanticized their history. Although the marriage had been filled with pain, infidelity, and drug use, she still felt as though she had lost her soulmate. The separation from Tom Vitale was harsh. According to Valerie, they got married in 2011 after meeting in 2004 and split up in 2019. It was 2021, Tom said. In court, that chronology was significant. The proceeds from the 2022 publication of Valerie's best-selling memoir, Enough Already, went into the court battle. Tom contested their marriage contract. Spousal support was what he sought. Valerie refused to back down. In her latter statement, she said that she stayed too long in both of her marriages. She thought that her love would be sufficient if she gave it enough. It wasn't. It wasn't the end of the suffering. Andrew, her father, passed away in 2016. He was an engineer for General Motors, a consultant who assisted in the construction of the Channel Tunnel, a good man, and an Army veteran. However, in 2014, he began experiencing mild heart attacks. He was already at a doctor's office when a large one struck. Following that, he went into assisted living with Valerie's mom. Andrew's passing marked the start of a string of losses. Valerie's friends and family kept dying. The sadness just kept piling up. She suffered greatly from menopause, as if that weren't enough. It lasted for almost 10 years, beginning at age 56. They were severe symptoms. Her bloopers, which she now chuckles about, were caused by her forgetting lines on Hot in Cleveland due to brain fog. But at the moment, it wasn't amusing. She had never experienced emotional crashes so intense. She is 64 years old and yet doesn't feel like herself. At one point, she queried her doctor about her mental health. "I don't know," responded the doctor. That response was unhelpful. However, it helped her realize that she wasn't alone. In an effort to make someone else feel less alone, she started having candid conversations with other women. Valerie Bertinelli had spent decades trying to convince everyone that her life was picture perfect. Grinning on red carpets, she was America's sweetheart and the wife of rock icon Eddie Van Halen. Appearing on magazine covers and marketing weight loss programs. However, all of that changed in 2022. That perception was brutally exposed in her memoir, Enough, Already. At the age of 20, she said, she fell in love with Eddie, but their relationship soon descended into a tangle of infidelity, drugs, and alcohol. She maintained the false belief that they were soulmates for years. She even acknowledged that she had made their marriage into a fantasy in her imagination, which was very different from the reality. Valerie persisted in acting as though nothing had happened since their 2007 divorce. She was still so engrossed in that old fantasy when Eddie passed away in 2020 that, despite the fact that they had not shared a home for 20 years, she put herself in the shoes of the struggling widow. Fans were taken aback. She remained married for 25 years to a man who made her feel unwelcome. In public, however, she portrayed herself as the contented wife. Readers were deeply impacted by that degree of unadulterated fear. It wasn't your typical celebrity gossip. The way that denial, addiction, and celebrity can distort reality was painfully demonstrated. To make matters worse, Valerie chose to distance herself from her weight, which had been a defining characteristic of her for years. She made a decision at 64 that nearly everyone was taken aback by. She stopped her diet. She no longer weighed herself. Her pursuit of the ideal number came to an end. This was from a woman who had worn a bikini on national television at the age of 48, worked as a Jenny Craig representative, and shed 50 pounds to appear on the cover of People magazine in 2009. But behind the scenes, she had been caught in a vicious cycle of constraint and obsession. She was constantly attempting to shed the same 10 pounds. After she finished writing her memoir, a change occurred. She said that her mental health dramatically improved nearly immediately after she stopped using the scale. She had not found serenity in her years of dieting, it turned out. She gave up drinking in 2023 and participated in Dry January. The weight began to drop on its own, but she had lost interest in that. Through healing, rather than dieting, she shed between 30 and 40 pounds by 2025. When she began to pay attention to her body instead of numbers, she demonstrated that real change had occurred.